Welcome to the Inflection Podcast, where we explore the pivotal moments that have shaped us into who we are today. I am your host, Anabi, and I can't wait to dive into these moments with you. Let's get it. Welcome to another episode of the Inflection Podcast. I have here with me today the man, the myth, the legend behind Chakra UI, Segun. Thank you so much for hopping on board with us, man.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Anabi. I'm really excited to be here. Happy to share my story any day, anytime.
Let's go. Get it. So yeah, I was sharing with you before we hit record, just coming across Chakra UI. You mentioned, yep, similar story with a lot of people who find chakra. And I was just curious, right? For me, I came across chakra because we're looking to build components for a startup I was working with, and it was taking too long, too slow. And we wanted to get components going super fast just to cut on dev time. And well, chakra was perfect. We found it and we started using it. And yeah, so I just wanted to peel back the curtains there to explore from your perspective, right? How did that come about? Were you having similar challenges and like, crap, I need to build something for this? Or what did that look like at the beginning days?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I never imagined chakra would be a thing. If you asked me, say 5 years ago, I
Yeah.
was just pretty ambitious dude that had this amazing startup idea. I wanted to actually build a web app to help people design their resumes really fast. And at the
Yeah.
time, I was also looking to integrate some AI things, even though I was pretty young back then. Right, so I got a few friends together. I worked primarily as a designer back then. Right, so I didn't know how to code. If you asked me 5 years ago, I was just
Wow.
some dude that knew how to use Figma and Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop. That's what I was. And then I just got my friends together. One was pretty good with front end. One was like a wizard in Python. So I just hey guys, can you just spare me some time after work every day to just go through this interesting idea that I designed in Figma. All right, so I think it really started from there and seeing their process and how they tried to implement the design. Of course, it takes time. You notice that they have to build custom components for every single thing. So that was my first example of learning experience to see that if it took me one day to design something in Figma, there's a very good chance it would take a developer 1 week, if not two, to actually implement those things and bring it to life on the web. And that's largely because you've got different constraints to work within. You've got desktop, mobile responsiveness, network requests, and all these many things that you have to do as a front-end developer that sometimes in design is just obscured away. You just design a screen and it's static, that's it, I'm ready to go. But
Yeah.
in the dev world, it's never that way. I started to actually see the patterns where it's there is a huge gap or a huge step between design and an actual working application, because you need to go past the primitive phase before you can then develop the application that you wanted to design in the first place. And for most teams, that primitive phase takes eats up almost 80% of the time, right?
Yeah.
And that's because the other 20% is pretty direct, some data fetching, and then you're done. But then the primitive ones are pretty much the one that eat up the bulk of the time, writing boring CSS with some important here and there is really crazy to figure out sometimes. So what I did then was pretty much to figure out how could I just improve this a little bit, maybe not too huge. So I took a stab at learning. So I actually got onto Egghead and then a couple of websites React training to learn
Yeah.
basics of React, of TypeScript, of the fundamentals of building UI components. So I literally started from there. And I think it took me roughly 8 months. So what I did, I used to be on a job before and also work on freelance platforms. So I just
Yeah.
caught it at that point. From now to the next 8 months, I just want to try to learn this and see what I can do to improve that process. I just did that. It's one of those things that I did. Just do it afraid. I'm not sure what's going to happen. Let's just see how it goes. And then I ended up just building a set of primitive components for the application that I had in mind. It wasn't meant for public consumption. It was just I had this app that I was building. It was called Career Lift at the time. and I made a little component set. I called it Career Chakra. That's kind of like the name. I called it. At some point, my friends were like, "Oh my god, this is so cool! If you had this maybe 8 months ago, we'd have finished the app by now." All right, so I was just like, okay, it must mean that this is actually valuable enough for them. So I just said, okay, how else can I share this with the world besides just the both of you? Because they also nudged me to try to actually make it available for other people. And then I heard like there's something called open source. Like go on GitHub and it just make it publicly available and try to manage the process from there. So I did that. At first, of course, I did a rookie mistake when they asked me to share it with other people. I just take the whole code and I zip it up and I just send this. Oh, and then I just sent it super as over. And then they're like, oh, no, that's not how it's done. So, and then they actually explained the process. And then I went again to watch and learn about the process of distributing code and managing versions and stuff like that. So that was like a different learning experience for me. And then from there on, it was just like, I put this in on GitHub and I made it open, set up the entire pipeline. As a rookie, it might not be as advanced. Just based on my own knowledge at this point in time, this is the best I could do. And I just tweeted about it. And I think from there, as it is, like it just took off from there and pretty much been my
Wow,
work since that time.
that is amazing. Oh my gosh, because that was the very next thing I was gonna ask you. What did traction in the early days look like? So thank you for painting that picture. So you put it on GitHub and folks started, forking the repo and using the code, and it took up from there. In hindsight, even with the GitHub process, other things you'd have done differently. Again, you would not have sent zip files directly to get it.
Yeah, of course.
But I asked because I've talked with quite a few people, and even for me, I've thought about open source, but it just feels so daunting to go that route. And I'm sure that doesn't work for everything.
Mhm.
So some ideas or thoughts you have there with that process of open sourcing, if that was a word,
Yeah,
Chakra
I
UI.
think I have a much better experience now. And of course, after Chakra, I've gone ahead to launch, I think, 3 other open source projects. All right. So with different people this time, each time trying to fine tune and improve the process because like open source, like you say, is pretty daunting. I have to be honest, even today, it's still as daunting as it used to be
Yeah.
because you initially set out with this an amazing idea. I have this passion. I see this problem. I want to solve it. And I think the same is true for even when you want to start a company as well. Right? You have the nice passion, you see the problem, you want to solve it, and then you go build it, and I put it out there. But
Yeah.
then the invincible part starts to show up, which is you have to manage issues or bugs. You have
Oh,
to relate to the fact that like people might want to contribute to your project, and those people are either less experienced or more experienced than you. So imagine if you saw a PR from a dude that studied computer science at Harvard University, opening a PR to your project, and then you just think of yourself like, oh my god, I'm just like one dude that came from design, and like, of course, I don't know so much computer science. I didn't know at that time. Of course, I know a lot now, but then looking there, it's just sense of like inadequacy. Like when you start to see
mm.
someone saying, I improved the algorithm and I increased the time matrix from 2 to 50. I'm like, what the heck does that mean? I don't even know. I don't even know what that meant. Or someone actually start to open like pull requests to improve the type safety of your project. And you start to learn really fast. But I think before you actually learn, there's this huge gap of doubt and like insufficiency that you feel almost like the imposter syndromes. Oh my God, there's so many ideas that people are bringing in and I don't know so much of them. And yet, of course, the people assume that so you have to take on the role and be like, okay, I need to learn. So just constantly learning, constantly improving. It's pretty much like how the game of open source is in general. And even if you think you know it and you start a new project, you go through the same experience over and
Yeah.
over again because of the premise that there's always someone that's smarter than you out there. So every time you do something, there's always people that want to help you out, but they're way smarter and you have to match up or at least be able to communicate and understand. Or if you're not able to understand, tell them to explain it to you in a way that like you can understand. So it's an interesting process if you ask me, but then the other challenging aspect of that is building community. A project without a community pretty much has like maybe a lifetime of a year or two. But to be able to go beyond that, you probably need a team. And beyond the team, you need a community of people, a place where people congregate to talk about just the project
Yeah.
only. So that was the other challenging part, whereas I never had this experience before. And then it's like beyond even the community, there's other pillars of things you have to do. Which is like everyone is constantly distracted. No one is going to care about your project if you don't talk about it. So you have to then take on the role of a product marketer, and then you have to go on Twitter. Hey guys, I made this cool stuff. Check it out. There's this new feature now in Chakra UI. Check it out. Like
Yeah.
you're a product marketer, a community manager, the same person writing the code base and tweaking and fixing the bugs. And the one also writing documentation. So you're also some sort of like content creator at the same time. So that is a
It's a lot of
huge
roles.
thing, so many roles in one. So that's why when people say it's pretty daunting, of course I can really relate because hey, it's too much.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah,
Especially, I would assume that at the beginning days, you're probably wearing all those hats or most of them. But as the project scales, you're able to get more people on board, either volunteer or paid, to help take on some of those roles or put on some of those hats. But early stage, you're doing it all. You're the whole orchestra, right?
yeah,
Playing
totally,
everything.
totally,
Uh,
totally.
what does community look like right now for Chakra? I know you have Discord. Is that a primary meeting space for collaborators? Obviously, beyond using the GitHub, like, but for your community platform.
Yeah, it's largely Discord. Of course, we've got also like our internal Slack because I think to be able to actually be effective, you cannot spread your time like on Discord and just respond to every single message. I think that will literally just take up your time the whole day,
Yeah.
right? And because of the nature of the project, it's open source, which means you're not getting paid to do this thing. So if you're not getting paid and you spend all your time responding to people and fixing issues, I don't know how else to waste your life, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Don't
it's kind
waste
of
your
like
time.
you have to somewhat set boundaries. So we have different people helping out with different parts of the community. So what we do is pretty much look out for people that are very helpful on Discord or on GitHub and actually try to get them into like our internal collaboration block. And then you can actually like from there on, they help us manage the different parts of the projects and evolve the project over time.
Smart. That is
Mm.
smart. Oh my gosh. That I should tweet that. I'll still waste your life. Managing on paid communities. No, that's really cool. And I was curious about that. So with Chakra right now, Chakra UI, what do you have some things on the horizon? I know some open source projects go the route of the core is open source. Think of it like a series of concentric circles. So the open
Yeah.
source thing in the middle, and then they build a bunch of things around that where you could have professional services, for example, to help some companies implement and things like that. So beyond, I know you have sponsorships, folks in Sponsor Chakra. Are there, and maybe if you're not sharing it, it's fine if it's not public knowledge yet, but on the horizon, do you have like other monetization strategies for Chakra?
Yeah, for Chakra, we actually to try that model as well. So we have a product called Chakra UI Pro, which is pretty much like a template-based engine. So if you want to build an e-commerce application or a marketing landing page, or an actual SaaS application, so we have all sorts of like code templates, and you can actually like just copy the code, paste it in your project,
Uh,
and that's it. So we have that model and it's still running till today. So I think we launched that like almost 2.5 years ago, roughly. So it's still up there. People that use Chakra can also use that service. And we actually decided to go the product route instead of the service route because, hey, you just make it once and it's always there. And also,
yeah.
I think the other reason is because, like, you already spend too much time in open source anyways. So, like, you don't have that much bandwidth to then go and invest in the product. And I think with open source, it's a symbiotic relationship. If you don't improve the core of the product, you're not going to get more sales on the products that you're selling. But then if you also don't improve the product you're selling, people are not that impressed to pay for it. And then so you keep going
Yeah.
through this spiral every time. So we go through this spiral almost 3 or 4 times in a year. Let's just try and see what we can do here to improve this. But I think beyond even just going through this cycle, we have to be aware that the tech space or like open source is a very fast paced ecosystem. So you don't want to stay there too long without looking deep into the future to see what else could we do, what else could we be doing out there to actually better position us and help us remain relevant. Because I think in the tech space, relevancy is a thing where it's like you could launch something today and in the next 6 months it's just completely irrelevant. And that's it. And it becomes irrelevant when influencers start to say, oh, this project is stale, it's old, it's no longer maintained. And then that's it. That's where the debt process begins for that
Oh my
project.
God.
So you pretty much
Painful
just want to
that.
like, you actually want to actually stay up to date and be able to not just maintain what we have currently as Chakra, but also look beyond Chakra to say, what is the next idea or innovation we can introduce to the ecosystem at large? That, of course, adds more work to the plate. And it actually involves being very intentional with your time because now you have not just one or two, you have 3 or 4 different projects that you're running. So I think with
Yeah.
this, I mean, going through this multiple times has pretty much given me a playbook to launch an open source project. So if
Yeah.
I have a new idea, just assemble a team around that and just launch the playbook, and that's it.
That's really cool. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. If you look back, would you have launched that paid pro version, the productized version? Would you have launched that sooner? Or you think you launched it at the right time, giving all the things you had to learn leading up to that?
I think I tried to launch it sooner by myself, and that did not work. Yeah, largely because I was already tied up with too many things, like managing everyone, managing community, building a team. I think like one of the things that we don't talk about when it comes to building a team is that a team also demands attention from you. Um,
Yeah.
and they also want you to like be able to answer questions. And then you're like, okay, you've got the community here, you've got the team here. Now you have to like the initial phase of building a team is like you need to spend enough time to pass the knowledge you have over to them. And that is also like a very straining process. So you have to hang in there and be able to do all that. So I had 2 things I could do at that time, build a team or build a paid product. But I didn't find a way to do both of them at the same time. So I just went into open the door of building a team instead. Right. So and I just forfeited like trying to be the product. So I saw a message from a friend. Someone I had a conversation. So at some point I got a message, a DM from someone that maybe had a random chat with over GitHub. And then he told me he was thinking about launching like a paid check for UI theme. So I just saw that like a nice opportunity to at least partner up with someone. Even though I was like pretty skeptical of like, if this is something I should do or should I do this on my own, of course. And then I'm always reminded that if you want to go for it, you have to go with other people, right? Not
Yeah.
just like try to do every single thing on your own. Like, what's the point of getting 100% of zero anyway? So I just decided, hey, dude, let's just build it. Let's just build it together. So we ended up actually building at the right time. Pretty much when I started to think about what else could I be doing with my time, be it besides just like doing open source every single time. And of course, with open source and sponsorships, you don't get that much financial income and money coming into the project. So it's just the sad reality of open source as well. So you have to build stuff if you want to get money, and because like people pay for things they value or things they perceive as value. So open source is not it's useful to them, but for most people, it's not really something I have to pay for because it's called open source anyway. So
Yeah.
why should I sponsor the project? It's a sad reality, but then we had to just pretty much walk through that and be able to build some sort of nest around the project to keep it alive for as long as possible.
Yeah. That's cool. That's cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. Lots of lessons there for those looking to go the route of open source. When you mentioned your playbook too, I feel like maybe you've published that somewhere or talked through that, but I know a lot of people who will gladly want to learn that from you in terms of what's a good playbook or guidebook and steps for rolling out an open source project, keeping it alive, building a team. There's so many, no pun intended, but so many components around the open sourcing a project. And I'm sure there are other folks who'll be trying to learn that. So as you work on resources and tooling around that, definitely will share with my audience. And in the footnotes, the show notes for this episode, odd links to Chakra and whatever else you want to shout out that you're working on. I know you mentioned you have 2 or 3 other projects you've open sourced as well. So
Yeah.
those are all things that I link to for those who are curious. I definitely am curious. So I want to check them out.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Are there things, words of advice? You've dropped so many gems in this episode, but are there words of advice you would give to, let's say, someone on the precipice, they want to dive in, launch open source project, or maybe even just a big project that feels daunting to them. And they don't know how to make heads or tails of it or how to get started. From your experience launching something as successful as Chakra, and it has grown way beyond the early days or when it was just you and your buddies working on it. What are some things, if you could help, just summarize that come to mind from your anecdotal experience?
Yeah, I think like it pretty much starts out with like why you want to do the open source project. Because I think that is something that people need to like, you need to be pretty honest with yourself about. People have reasons for doing things like open source. One of them could be that I want to get a job, I want to get noticed, and I want to get a job. That means that like the moment you launch it and you get the job, the project goes is pretty much dead afterwards because you reach the goal, like that's it, and then you just keep moving from there. Some personas that want to make money. Open source is not particularly the place to make money because it's called open source for a reason. So you have to solve the financial, maybe go find money elsewhere before going into open source because you most likely realize that like you it's not that rosy financially when it gets into open source. I think the best an open source can transform into is a company. So you can go from an open source project, go into a company, and then you maybe get into YC and actually raise money. But again, that part is also like equally as brutal as open source because you then have to like get money, employ people, manage people. I think open source is pretty, I would say open source is a good launch pad for before you build a business, try actually go to the gym a little bit and use open source as your gym. Just go flex your muscles and see how far you can go. Because everything you do in a company, you actually do everything in an open source project as well, which means that you see a problem, you have an idea, you think that there are enough people that are craving for this idea. People complain about it on Twitter and you just be like, that's it, that's what I want to solve. And then you try to solve that problem, then you realize that solving the problem is just like getting started because you actually just you need to get a team, you need to write documentation, you need to actually set up processes to make sure like quality remains the same as you
Yeah.
actually ship stuff. Right? So those are pretty much like the process you have to go through as a creator trying to do an open source project. But I think the last thing I would add to that is to be willing to ask for help and also not to be afraid to look stupid or to look like you don't know stuff. Because I think as a developer, you have this ego around, yeah, you're like, I don't want anyone to know that, like, just want to hide the fact that I don't know some things. But I think that's usually counterproductive, right? So you want to
Mhm.
be open enough to say that I don't know enough about this topic. Unfortunately, if you can provide more things for me, I'm happy to learn. Just show me where to go pretty much, right? So
Yeah.
the great thing about open source is that open source is pretty much like you're learning from 1,000 people instead of just one. You're pretty much like everyone else can give you access to their resource if you ask for that. So being willing enough to ask, and also when the work gets really intense, it will get intense. That is, it's 100% certain. I think if your project even gets popular really fast. It sounds nice. Like your project yeah, is super nice. People know my project now, but I think the force that comes with that is a bit too much sometimes to
Yeah.
handle. Right. So it's like you go high pretty fast and then they just leave you up there. It can come crashing down if you're not pretty too careful with that. The thing with open source is also knowing when to draw boundaries. Open source is a public to-do list think of it like you have your own to-do list and it's just like public to everyone and anyone can drop any item in your to-do list. So
Yeah.
you have to be able to draw boundaries. This is my own to-do list. This is open source to-do list. I'm gonna treat myself first before then going into like open source because you have to manage the stress levels. It gets really high in open source because for the job, you have a timeline. You do the timeline in 2 weeks, a year, Everyone is happy. You get a few days to breathe, and then you go on. With open source, you don't even get any time to breathe, and you pretty much just, including the holidays, you get issues. You get your to-do list being filled up, and you'll be shocked that on Christmas Day you get a DM from someone saying, "Hey, you haven't done this. I mean, it's fixed this problem."
You're like, what? It's Christmas. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Christmas. And you never
That,
actually take breaks except you draw the boundaries yourself. Well, which is
yeah.
like try
Oh
to
my,
solve that need to please people with open source. Like it's open source, it's your project. You are the shepherd of the project, so you have to somewhat get control over the reading of that project. Because I think that the to-do list, the public to-do list gets a bit too much. And sometimes you're scared that you don't want to disappoint people. If I don't fix this in quickly, if I don't
mhm.
fix it now, I'm disappointing the entire community and everyone would be so unhappy with me. But hey, most people are not even thinking about that. They're just thinking about their jobs or things about their own
Yeah.
life. So you don't want to be so
100%.
burdened by that. So I
Mm,
think the main theme of this is pretty much like you are the architect of the project, so you just design it according to how you want it to go, and also be aware that it's not a there are no financial incentives there. Maybe you get a little, but nothing so huge to sustain the project. And then of
yeah.
course, ask for help as much as possible.
Thanks, brother. Thank you so much for sharing that. One last thing. Are you working on Chakra full time now?
Yeah, I'm working on all my projects full time. Yep.
Okay, so Chakra and the other couple you've rolled out, you're doing
Yeah.
those full time. How do you said something that I just want to key in on? How do you manage how do you recharge? Like, how do you stay alive and refresh managing? Because open source does take a toll, like you've said, and I concur. How do you stay sane? And I guess that's the term, recharge. How do you not run out of gas?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much you need to know when to just stop the engine completely. I think there's a fear of if I just leave for a day or two or 1 week, like everything will come crashing down. I think it's a very similar fear to if you own a company and you're just scared that if I stop working at this company, like we're not gonna make any money. And you just want to keep working every day. But I think for me, the more I've done open source, the more I've learned that you need to be able to like delegate to other people and be comfortable doing that. And I think that there's also just let things breathe is also another thing. Like
Mhm.
when you
Yeah.
launch something, there's the tendency that you want to just like from the day you launch it, you want to keep going, you want to fix that issue, measure PR in, write that documentation. It's like just let it in, breathe and take a break for a while.
Yep.
And there's a lot of magic that happens in that process when it's really hard to consciously disconnect because you started this project for a reason. You want to be known, you want to get a job. So there's so much anxiety built up to that moment. It's, oh, finally, it's getting known. That's exactly what I want. And you just want to keep pushing at it. I think there's always the role of rest in like any growth process. Like you plant the seed and you just let it like get in nourishment from the soil. And after a while, it starts to grow. All right.
Yeah.
So, but then if you plant the seed and then you grab a chair and you sit there waiting for it to grow, you just, you
Come
actually
on,
become like
bro.
still anxious. So I think it's just the role of like consciously disconnecting. It's really hard to do, but I think like you have to solve that root problem of wanting to please people. If you can actually
Yeah.
like get that thing out of your system, it helps you to just at some point just cut it off and just take a break, come back again in 2 weeks and everything
Okay.
will be fine. Yep.
No, that's helpful. And hey, brother, you have the best analogies. You have the best analogies. Very visual and paints a picture. Thank you so much for hopping on board with us today on the Inflection Podcast. I can't wait to publish this out. I'll chat with you about some distribution
Yeah.
models for it. But yeah, this is awesome to get you on.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.